feel are based on the Earth's daily rotation. The Babylonians attributed certain traits to each of the planets. For example, Mars, ruler of Aries, is red, so is associated with aggression and war. The planets definitely influence life here on Earth. You need look no further than the moon for evidence. As a footnote, the Encyclopedia Britannica defines astrology as a scientific art of divining the fate and future of human beings from indications given by the positions of the stars and other heavenly bodies. Discuss.
I mean, didn't
Well, I've got a pair of heavenly bodies sitting in front of me.
Well, don't
Oh,
you? Ooh la la.
I mean, they used the constellation of stars and stars for navigation. That was the first.
Of course.
Yes,
you know,
absolutely.
That would have
Ancient
been the
mariners.
first connection to it.
You're not wrong there.
Yeah, which is quite clever, especially if you're travelling by.
Well, they didn't have
boat.
sat-nav in those days, so they needed
No,
something.
it would have been difficult. I've been staring
Yeah.
at the screen for a long time, nothing coming up.
Siri?
Are you sure you were plugged in? Oh, yeah.
Which way to America?
Of course, one of the things that we forget is that if you go back to that time, they virtually had no artificial light at all.
Correct.
So you were able to see so much more,
Oh,
and
the
without
expanse of
the
the night
pollution
sky.
and all the rest of it.
That's right.
that
Would have been
it
amazing.
It would have been the equivalent almost of being in space.
Yeah.
No
Today.
high-rise flats, you mean?
Well, there wouldn't have been. It just wouldn't have. There was no pollution. There was no light pollution. So you had this ability to be able to
See every
to
star.
see. So that's why when you go down to places like the Arctic, where the air is very clear, excuse me, and there's no artificial light present, that you get to see the heavens, and which the way they saw it, which was
Yep.
the way that they saw it. But but why? I mean, that's the issue. Is it only so that they could describe the 1/12th period, and why is it 12? I mean, I can understand the 4 seasons.
Yep.
You've got when things start to grow, you get when things are really growing, and then you get the time when they're going to start dying, so you reap your harvest and they go to sleep.
Yeah.
So those are the 4 natural ones, but I don't necessarily see why that automatically translates into 12.
It was just how they interpreted it in the day, and that's just something that's been brought forward into modern times. It's just the actual 12 cycles, and they've related those cycles to whatever constellations were in the sky at that particular period. So in each of those cycles is approximately 30 days.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yes.
So whichever one was prominent during that period in the sky would be associated with that particular 30-day period. And that's and just going forward. And that's how they started to work out the different times in relation to when they could plant, when they could harvest, and so forth, when cold weather was coming, and so forth. So they would know by following those patterns. It's how they had to live their life in those days, because they really had nothing else to go by. And once they worked out there was a pattern here, it started to make life a little easier for them. And also knowing the different connotations of what the different signs represented in relation to, the fire signs, the water signs, and so forth. They would know in those particular periods when different things quite predictably would happen, and then following different stages, like in relation to eclipses and that sort of thing. Obviously, in those days, they saw them as quite foreboding, which I think they still kind of can be in a way.
Did the occult use the zodiac?
Lunar months, they work off more or less the movement of the sun and the
moon.
Yeah.
The moon.
But there are a certain constellation of stars that they use to collect power, but it's not really a zodiac, so to speak. So there's 12 months, isn't there? But there's actually only, is it 10 lunar months in a year? So they would work around that way. But it's interesting, really, how initially I think any culture would have been built around the tide, the moon, the stars, the sun. Like the old saying, a red star at night, shepherd's delight, red sky in the morning, shepherd's warning.
Yeah.
It's been carried through for generations, hasn't it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We were a lot more in touch with the earth back in those days, and nature, and just being aware of everything, whereas now we're so distracted by so many things that we've kind of lost touch a little bit.
I wanted to
with
ask
all
a
that.
question, Claudia, because I want you to talk about the complexity of star signs, because a lot of people seem to think that one star sign, that fits all in terms of, like, say, for, like a Scorpio, when they do, the readings, or,
The local paper or whatever.
yeah, every
They're all
single
the same.
Scorpio in the
Yeah.
whole wide world,
Yeah.
will have the
It's going to be
same.
hit by a bus on
Yeah,
Tuesday.
that's right. So, obviously, we have a dominant sign, and you've alluded to other signs like a rising sign and moon sign, which makes up our personality.
Correct.
And I think it's important to recognise our uniqueness. So people become confused because, like I said previously, that they don't want one size fits all. So can you explain that a little bit more for the listeners?
Absolutely. So I think a really good example of that is, let's take a set of twins. So you can have twins, and depending how close they were born together, their personalities will be more similar. But if you're going to have twins that were born, say, 2 hours apart, that's given the planets enough time to move where the second twin will have a different rising sign. So what does that mean? That means even though they both might be Cancerians, born on the same day, so numerologically they'll have the same life number, so there will be similarities in their lifetime. But the fact that 2 hours has transpired means that the second child will be somewhat different, not only in appearance, because they'll have a different sign sitting on the rising point in their chart, which is the horizon point in the chart, as opposed to the child that was born first. So there will be differences between them. Other things will be very similar, like obviously planets like Mercury, Venus, Mars, and so forth will more than likely all be on the same degree or very similar degrees on that particular day. So there will be a lot of things that they'll have in common. But those two little things, the moon and the rising sign, is what will make them different.
So it's all to do really with not only the day, the year, but actually what time you were born.
That the planets are moving constantly, so that's exactly right. So you can have 10 people all born on the same day, and even in the same place, in the same hospital, they will have very similar lives, but if they've all been born at different times during that day, that's enough to make them different. So if that helps.
So working on that theory, if I was born at 4 o'clock in the morning on the 1st of April 1950, and someone else was born at 4
You did that on
o'clock,
purpose, you know that, don't you?
Yeah.
someone else was born at exactly the same time, does them being, but they happen to be in
Another country?
Holland.
Yeah, okay.
Get it out, Brodie.
Does that make a difference?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The location, it's location makes a big difference. So someone who was born in the northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere, the same day at the same time, even though the time actually will be different depending on where you are, but it will still make a difference in relation to what their rising sign will be, because that clock will move in a different time as opposed to the person being born here.
Yes, all right. But
Yeah, so
but if I was born in Sydney and
Yep.
this other person was born in Melbourne,
Yep.
then we share the same time, we share the same southern hemisphere,
Yep.
we share, in theory, absolutely everything other than
Yep.
800 kilometres. Does that 800 kilometres matter when you are charting?
Yes.
It does.
It does,
Okay.
absolutely, because when you do the longitude and the latitude, that that does dictate
absolutely, of course it does.
where that rising sign is sitting.
Right.
So you might end up with a Leo ascendant, but the person born in Sydney, because they were born in a different longitude and latitude, might have an Aries ascendant. So even though everything else is exactly the same, it's that one little thing that will make you a little bit different.
So are you saying I'm unique?
You're very unique, Dan, and you know it too.
And you're the only one, thank God, Brodie.
He has his own postal code.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to bring up a little bit of music, because we've got one little segment to go.
We
haven't
do spirits with spirits. Yay.
Okay, and our spirit for today is...
Sake.
Well, you're quite right. Have you got your sake handy?
Yes, I have.
They are being.
I think I've been
Marvellous.
slurping on some of mine.
They're being. Oh, you've run out. Yours
I
is
did.
gone.
I had a bit of a tickle in my throat. That's my excuse.
Yeah, well, have a taste of mine then. You can take that one.
Oh, you're very sweet. Thank you.
So sake, which you all know, is made of rice, and they polish the rice before they do it, so that it's not just straight out of the husk.
Okay.
What, each grain individually?
Yeah, they get out there. Get out
Small nail brush.
a tiny little toothbrush,
Well, the fairies have to have something to do. Like seriously.
and that then gets it.
You'll be seeing fairies after this.
It goes with. It gets brewed like any other alcohol, and the sugar becomes. It's stronger than conventional wine. It's not as strong as a spirit, but it is very spiritual, and it's very much part of the religious process in Japan.
Oh,
And
okay.
it's also it's a sign of birth, and it's a sign of departure. And it's it is a cleanser for the soul, and that's why if you happen to commit harikiri, you should have a glass of sake before you die. I'm not surprised.
What,
I'd need
immediately
about-
after mass murder? So I'll just have a quick drink of that. I'm all right. Yeah, thanks
Need
very
about
much.
27
Off we go.
pints before I stick a knife into me. But there you go. But it's either served hot or cold.
I've never had it hot.
It's you need to. It's I prefer it hot. I prefer it warm. It's but at body temperature,
Okay.
and it's it is a great enhancer to food, and that's why even the smallest amount cleanses the palate
Oh, I
beautifully.
was going to say that. That's a bit like, what's the Greek ouzo, is it? Isn't that about
Yeah, but
cleansing?
it is, but it has a
Cleansing.
very strong. Sake is a very subtle, almost sweety, earthy
Yeah.
texture, quality to it. I like it very much. If ever I go to a Japanese restaurant, I will always have it because I think it really does go with the food. But as with so many things in Japan, the ones that you've been drinking out, which are almost, if you were drinking a cup of tea, you'd be bloody angry because it dribbles all over the place. But it's actually based on the lotus and the
The little teacups. Yeah, they're beautiful.
it all comes back to the lotus, and sake cups go right back in time and are very, very sought after because they're collector's pieces. Because it's usually a very fine china, or it's got a very delicate pattern.
Yeah.
And it's like the tea ceremony in Japan, which is a full ceremony. The pouring of sake is always done from the right, and that's why it's in very small cups. You don't drink it by the pint.
Why is it by the right then?
I don't know why it's by the right, but it is always served to the right.
I wonder if that's...
Because
Sometimes
it is the right.
the poo hand is the left.
No, I don't know whether that's good.
Well, isn't that the masculine side? Is the
Yeah.
Yeah.
we need to talk later.
Some things you can't say.
So I'm not going to talk to him about sake. I'm just going to do this. I'm going to bring the music in so that we can bring this, because it obviously seems that 1 teaspoon of sake sends these
all she needs.
two off into the white blue vestas of doing peculiar things with dirty hands about your body. Which is
Watch
great.
out for the poo hand.
That's it.
Next week, what do we have?
Yes. Okay. So next week we have. Where are we? Next week we have got part 2 of our spiritual connection, mind and body. There we go. Did you want to do the quote for the day?
Well, the quote for the day: one small positive thought in the morning can change your whole day. And watch out for the poo hand.
Yeah. This. You can find us on Spotify.
Well, yes, where do we find you?
And the Numinous Factor at hotmail.com. Tell us your stories.
We want to hear from you.
We want to hear them, absolutely.
And share on Facebook, because whoever...
And absolutely, you can find us on Facebook.